Hi, today I will be presenting FPSC. It stands for Future Proof Solder Core, and it's about standardized system on module. So let's get started. Now we're going to look at standards in general, and then look at FPSC as a special standard. Um, First of all, you're going to have to ask yourself a question: why choose a standard song? Um, from our perspective, there are four reasons. Exchangeability. So for example, you might want to just do one carrier board design or one product design, but have multiple flavors and of this end device. And you can use the scalability to scale in performance of your end device or functionality by just exchanging a standardized SOM with another one. And supply chain security. That's another topic. You want to be flexible in case of component crisis or so. There might be one chip vendor that can't provide the chip anymore, the processor, but another one can. And you just want to, continue delivering your product. Then you could just exchange the module with a module that has a chip that's available. And then, of course, product longevity. You can also replace system on module if the processor is discontinued. And so it just gives you security that your product, your investment that you made will stay available. Um, I have I've created this overview of what happens or what are the options if you're using a standard, and how a vivid product roadmap of your end product could look like in order to make the most use of the standard. So let's have a look here. The TCO, that's the total cost of ownership, including development and maintenance, is the red line. And if we say you start a typical product design with introduction, growth phase, maturity, and decline of the product sales, um, you would start off with a product like initial A, is what I call it, the green line, the dark green line. And well, typically, in the introduction phase, you don't have many sales, but at some point your revenue starts going up in the growth phase, and then it slowly goes down through the maturity into the decline. That would be a typical product lifecycle, right? But if you have the capability of taking the same carrier board design or the product design and exchanging the system on module, and for example, creating a low-cost version of it by just taking a low-cost module and having actually a second product or a variant of this product, then you can actually add additional revenue. This is the added value revenue of this product and the low-cost A product. And you can actually have added revenue to your existing product by just doing a variant. And in addition to that, you can also prolong the period of lifetime of your product within maturity phase, for example. So if the processor that you're using might be discontinued or might be not up to date, you might want to do an update of your products by exchanging the system on modules. And then you can prolong the maturity time by creating, for example, as a replacement of initial A product, creating initial B and creating a second low-cost version to replace low-cost A with low-cost B. And therefore, you can continue your lifetime of your once developed product with a very low invest in terms of cost of ownership. Okay, so here's an overview of the currently existing standards. I focused on standards that only support ARM or ARM and other processor platforms. Um, yeah, we are looking at SMARC, Q7, and OSM. SMARC. Supported architectures are ARM and x68. Sizes go from 82 times 50 up to 82 to 80. lots of pins. There's a connector. It's a connectorized version. It's not a solder standard, and you're using 314 pin MX M3 type connectors. Voltage, yeah. And then you have the carrier board layout complexity, which is quite low. When I say layout board complexity, means how complex is it to create a carrier board for this standard, for this footprint. And then I also looked at the number of guaranteed interfaces and features that are brought out through the standard, and how many are must-have signals and how many are optional, meaning if the processor provides these signals, then they are at that defined position. But if they're not there, then the pin will just be not connected. So guaranteed signals here are 14%, and optional signals are 44 and 42 May signals. And then we have Q7. Q7 is actually a smaller version with less pins, 230 pin, but also connectorized, covers ARM and x68, so multiple platforms. And 5 volt is the power that is the voltage that is typically used. And we have low complexity for the carrier board design. Yeah, so you would be fine using 6 layers as a maximum. You probably don't need more to route out all signals. Guaranteed interfaces is 20% must have and 80% optional. OSM. OSM even covers 3 types of architectures: MCU architectures, ARM architecture, and x68. So it's trying to create a standard that covers a lot of standards, which can be also compromised. Sizes are quite nice, 30 times 15 for the MCU versions, going up to 45 by 45 as a maximum. Connections, lots of pins, 622, 5 volt voltage. Carrier board complexity, that is quite high. So if you want to root out all signals, because we have lots of pins right by each other and not much space in between, you're probably going to need 8 layers if you really want to route out all signals. So that's worst case. And guaranteed interfaces, we have 28% and 72 are optional. So now let's have a look at what you should consider when choosing a standardized solder-on module. Of course, we have compatibility. We're going to look at cost, design complexity, manufacturability, and technical reliability are the most important topics. So when it comes to compatibility, it makes sense to look at what the standard is trying to cover, which kind of architectures is it covering. If it's trying to cover a lot of architectures and it's not specialized for a certain architecture, there might be compromises that are created for this pinout. How many interfaces are really guaranteed? If you have a high amount of guaranteed interfaces, you won't have too much of a headache when trying to find a compatible system on module, and you have a certainty that you will find a system on module that will provide the most important interfaces that you need. Yeah, and then on the other hand, how many interfaces are actually optional? How flexible is the standard defined? So for example, if there's not many must-have signals defined, a SOM vendor might decide to prioritize during the muxing of his module to decide to use certain interfaces of the processor and not use the other ones because they're actually conflicting with each other when trying to make the muxing. So there's interpretation space for the SOM vendor to choose one interface or to choose the other interface to support. There might be both available on the connector, but you're going to have to make a decision. And if there's no priority set by must-have signals, then one can decide this way or this way, and then the compatibility is not given. And another thing is software compatibility. It's important to make sure that since, yeah, typically today embedded design, the effort of software development for an embedded design is about 50% compared to hardware design efforts. So it doesn't make sense to want to be compatible and save cost by having pin compatible system on modules and then have a lot of problems with completely different BSP structures, BSP versions, kernel versions, and so on, having to do a complete software redesign. That can be quite inconvenient. Cost. If you look at cost, there might be additional components that you need in order to compensate for anything that system on module. If the standard is not fully defined, like the control signals, like the timing of the control signals, how is the reset behavior, boot selection, and power good signals, all these control signals, they interact with each other, they have certain timings, and if they vary from one version of the standard-sized SOM to another, then you're going to have some logic on your carrier board to compensate with that, and you're going to have to foresee that. So you're going to have to look at all modules that you want to use and make sure that you're really capable of controlling those signals. Maybe there might be the requirement to do I/O level shifting if the I/Os differ from one module to the other. And of course, maybe you want to also convert interfaces. So if you do not have an HMI port and you want one, you could convert an LVDS display port to an HDMI interface, things like that that you might want to consider, but they will cost you. And is there a longevity strategy? You want to prolong the lifetime of a product, so you want to make sure that you don't have the development invest from over and over again for the same kind of product just because, yeah, there's no standard that will support your product for a longer time. And redesign costs in case of a SOM exchange. How much cost do you have? As I just mentioned, software is a topic you might want to consider. Design complexity. How good is the documentation of the standard? Do you have an overview of all the interfaces that are available on the different SOMs? Or are there, yes, all spread around, different vendors providing different documentation? You're going to have to figure out, are they really pin compatible? Or did the vendor decide to leave away interfaces since they're optional? Carrier board layout complexity. What kind of PCB technology do you need to support the standard? If the standard is quite complex, the footprint is complex, very tight, you might have to purchase do complex layout that might cause you problems later in the EMC chamber or so. And of course, how many layers do you need, which also adds to the cost of the carrier board. Manufacturability. You want to make sure that you're using a proven solder technology with a low production yield, and that might even be repairable by exchanging the system on module on your carrier board. If you have a very costly carrier board and you think that the SOM might have a problem or the other way around, then you might want to exchange the SOM for your product to make sure that it's running again. Technical reliability. EMC optimized layout is important. The footprint needs to be optimized for that. Not every footprint is optimized for differential signal routing. So you need to look at that also. And ruggedized solder technology. It has to be qualified against technical standards in order to ensure that you will not hit any problems with your solder connection when the product is out in the field. Temperatures are rising, falling back and forth, maybe physical stress on the solder connection by vibration. Those are all things that need to be ensured that they won't cause problems on the long run. And why did Phytec invent FPSC, a new standard? Well, because we looked at exactly these things. We have a lot of experience with soldering modules, and we haven't found a solution that meets all the needs of customers who are looking for a standard, especially a solderable standard. So we invented future-proof solder core that takes care of all the just mentioned criteria. Yeah, the strategy was we focused on having a footprint with 3 zones, and it needs to be 100% future-proof. So what's important about a good footprint? Um, as I already said, minimal complexity in design for the PCB routing was one focus. Cost optimization and flexibility in terms of variable size. And we also added stable anchor joints, solder joints, to add stability to the solder connection, because we've experienced that this adds, even in harsh environments with drop testing from 1 meter, and also vibration and shock testing according to automotive specifications, that these solder joints are most rugged. So how does it work? As I said, it's variable size. So if we have a system on module processor that doesn't have many pins, we've created this growable size, um, going from 30 millimeters to 27 millimeters, and anything in between up to 50 millimeters to 53 millimeters. And these routes here, these anchor joints, they are on the carrier footprint, and the system on module, if it has a size limited to, for example, this much, as I'm showing here with the cursor, then there will be a solder connection on the edge of the module, and it will connect to this landing strip, as you could call it, by soldering on. And it will add additional stability to these already existing solder joints here. So we have the advantage that we can have flexible size of the module, and we have additional solder connections that will ruggedize these connections. Reduced layout complexity. How did we do that? So first of all, we can save up to 70% of costs for the carrier board, because we have done layout testings, and we could do a full layout with only 6 layers of the carrier board, bringing out all signals. We only need drilled via technology, so no lasered via, and we have 100 micro line in space. This is actually based on our footprint. If we go back, if you look at this footprint, we don't have many rows right next to each other, and then you will have pins in the middle that you need to route out. And we also made sure that we have enough space between the pins so that you can route out 2 signal lines from the middle. So we only have one middle line that needs to be routed out between 2 uh, um, connections. And there's the possibility to route out 2 signal lines between these spaces between the balls. And we also made sure that differential signals are only on the outside and not in this inside row, because differential signals, they need to be routed close to each other, and they need to be routed length controlled. And this is very difficult if you have a footprint that has, I don't know, 8 to 10 rows right beside each other, and you're trying to get out the middle. And if you have differential signals in that middle, you're going to have a big problem trying to route these out. And you're going to need yeah, sophisticated technology, PCB technology, like not drilled via technology, but lasered via technology. And that is costly. And that's why we're saying we can save 70% of cost since we only need 6 layers and not such a sophisticated technology on the carrier board in order to route out all the signals. And I mean, imagine the price of the carrier board, the PCB, has a big effect if the PCB is bigger. So the bigger the carrier board, the more technology you need on the carrier board, and the higher amount of layers you have, the more cost it will generate. Okay, so now the footprint, the solder technology. We choose fused tin grid array. This is a technology that already brings pre-soldered connections on the system on module. And when you populate the system on module on the carrier board, or we do it if you don't want to produce yourself, um, then the carrier board will also get pre-soldered. And then we have enough solder in between the two mating PCBs in order to compensate coplanar deviation. So if they are not 100% parallel because of heat and shrinkage, there might be a gap that is a little bit bigger, and these pre-soldered solder joints will compensate for that. Other standards support LGA, where the solder is not pre-soldered onto the connections, and that might cause problems when making the connection and when soldering. So we actually did vibration tests together with our anchor joints that I explained, and these pre-soldered FTGA connections. We've done vibration and shock resistant tests according to EN 6600 68-2, which comes from the automotive area. Now the footprint itself. We made sure that we have a large amount of must-have signals because we think that is the most and best guarantee for a customer to ensure that his product will be available and there will be versions of his product in the future with different modules that are compatible. And we have 3 ring. We decided to part up our footprint in 3 rings. The inside ring is the must-have signal ring, where we gather all the signals that are 100% required. And then comes the preferred ring, that's the outer ring. And then we have a proprietary ring, which is signals which are not required if you don't want to stick with the standard. And we call this a feature set where all these signals are predefined. So the inner ring, as I said, is the must-have ring. We ensure that we have 52% of all signals are must-have in this feature set. And it groups essential and typical features of processors, embedded processors on the market. So we're talking USB, we're talking RS-232 CAN, and so on. I'll show you a list in a second. And yeah, and these are all supported. These signals are 100% supported by the standard according to the feature set. And then we have the preferred signals. Those are the signals that will be available if the processor has these signals. And then they will be available at the predefined position so that you can be ensured that if the signal is there, it will be exactly at that position in the same type of signal. And we have the property signals. So in case you want to use this module other than a standard within a standard, and you don't care about the standard, you can actually also use the non-standardizable signals of the processor because we do route those out as well. Yeah, and the feature set part is something where we focus on the future, where we say, okay, currently we are capable of saying there's a certain group of processors that all combine into one standard, and it makes sense to standardize them. And the amount of compatible interfaces is so high that our feature set gamma is the right kind of definition for these processors. And there will be multiple processors coming in the future. We started off with 3 now, and we're continuing to develop more processors based on the standard. And this standard FPSC gamma is the first feature set with a certain definition of pinout, must-have signals, and optional signals, and also the footprint. But there might be in the future, caused by technological evolution, there might be changes, new interfaces, for example, USB 4.0 and whatever, 10 gigabit, 100 gigabit Ethernet, all new interfaces that we can't foresee right now. So the idea is to have another feature set in addition, and maybe even in parallel, so that we can still keep this feature set running with the newest processors, but on top of that, also add the newest processors to this standard, making or this footprint, and add to the same processor to 2 product lines, this one covering even the newest features. And we also have foreseen the future in terms of leaving blank signals or connections for upcoming interfaces that we haven't foreseen in the must-have area, as well as in the optional area. We can add signals if they come and if they're interesting to add. Those changes will be backward compatible, so you will not be able to use the new signals if you already have an existing design, and new signals will be added. But with a new design, you will be able to use these. But it will not have any effect on existing systems. You will just not use the new signals. And we've also had some thoughts about design for manufacturability. This is more for debugging and for the development phase. We've created a connector which doesn't have to be soldered, so you don't have to solder the system on module. You can just use this connector, put it on your carrier board with the footprint of FPSC, and then you can stick in the module on top, press it down, and there are alignment pins that will ensure the accurate placement of the module, and there are double-ended spring probes inside this adapter that will then make the connection between the carrier board and the system on module without the need for any soldering. This is good for prototyping. So for example, if you want to find out if you're seeing a problem and you want to find out if the problem is coming from the carrier board or from the system on module, you might want to exchange one or the other and see if the problem still consists. Or you want to exchange system on modules with different processors or different memory configurations. This is easy to do. And if you have a limited number of prototype carrier boards, this is a nice way to go during your development. And then for products in series, if there are any problems with the carrier board or with the system on module coming from the field, and you have RMAs, you might want to replace one or the other component. You can actually use our removal tool to use a standard rework station, SMD rework station, to replace the system on module by desoldering it and then resoldering another module on top of the carrier board in case there's an RMA maybe, and you have a very costly carrier board. And this is a video how it works. So it's quite nice. You can see it's being heated from the bottom, and then the solder connection loosens up, and this thing carries it up. So compatibility, all requirements for a good standard are now fulfilled by FPSC. The compatibility, we focused on the cost. we focused on design complexity, keeping that low. The manufacturability was something that we really made sure that it's easy and reliable, and the technical reliability of the solder connection. So all those standards, requirements of a typical standard are fulfilled. Our Pioneers products are based on IMX 9.5 processor from NXP, IMX 8M Plus, and a new processor that I'm not allowed to mention yet, but it's an AM6 processor, and it covers more the low-cost area so that the full spectrum of our products is covered in terms of performance. We have must-have signals. This is a list of must-have signals for this feature set. And we also have the list of preferred signals for all three processors. And then we have the proprietary signals, especially with the IMX 9.5, where we have, for example, 10 gigabit Ethernet and some additional USB control signals. So this is just for reference. We will send you the presentation anyway, and you can have a look at this table in detail. As I mentioned, we have a low-cost coverage in terms of performance and cost, as well as high-end and mid-end performance coverage with FPSC in our portfolio. So typically we provide a system on module with a carrier board for evaluation purposes. And to go with that, we provide also the Linux operating system or another RTOS or Android, for example, in addition with the middleware components that then support cloud services, machine learning, over-the-air updates, and security features, and also supporting the vision requirements in terms of middleware. Yeah, our standardized Linux BSP also helps to support our FPSC standard, of course. All Phytec BSPs are unified by the Amplify meta layer. So all the look and feel and the structure is unified throughout all products that we have and provide a Linux BSP, Yocto Linux BSP. All the important middleware components are guaranteed and pre-tested before delivery. So we have a Rework update client in all of our BSPs, which is guaranteed to be there. It doesn't make sense to have an update system and then update with an image that doesn't support your update client anymore. Then you locked yourself out. And if the products are out in the field, that's something you don't want. So having a guarantee that the same update client is always pre-tested and works is a good thing. So having fluctuation in that doesn't really make sense. Also Qt framework and Video for Linux framework, GStreamer, and many more middleware components are guaranteed. You always have the same build system. It's Yocto based for all releases with our build scripts, which are always the same for each product. And we have a mainline focus, making sure that our products are in mainline and supported, and we actually switch to mainline as a release when it's possible. And this ensures even more compatibility because if your product is supported in mainline, it doesn't matter for which product you download the mainline sources, they will be the same for each product, just with a different device tree. So our mainline strategy is that we start off with a vendor BSP. Unfortunately, with vendor BSPs, you're kind of coupled to their release cycle, which is typically quarter year or even longer, half year, which is not so convenient when you're looking at security, where you have to have, for example, CRA, the new requirements coming from the EU for digital devices, requires an applicable reaction in applicable time when finding a security vulnerability, and you can't just wait a quarter or half a year to update your system. You have to respond quickly. and therefore vendor releases are not so optimal for updating as a quick response. That's why we wait until Mainline offers enough features, and then we switch from the vendor BSP to a parallel offering where we still offer the vendor BSP, but also a Mainline BSP, and then we can offer nightly builds for any product. And we can also ensure that even beyond maintenance from the vendor, we will support our system on modules by using Mainline. Typically, our BSP structure looks like this, and this is based on the Securify distro, which is a secure distro distribution, which standardizes also security features. We have the board support package with the drivers adapted to the hardware. We have the operating system itself, the middleware components, and then we have a maintained security features that we standardized using the features that the chip vendor provides. For example, the public key infrastructure, the secure boot mechanisms, the secure storage. For example, if you need to have memory areas encrypted, this is also possible. Network connection, intrusion protection, access permission and hardening are all prepared in these scripts and documentations. And our customers can then add their application and services on top of the BSP. And we have a release strategy where we take, for example, LTS releases. This is an old example, but back then LTS was kernel 5.4 with Yocto Dunfell, and we took that and we created a BSP release out of it, continuously tested it in our test farm. We have a Jenkins-based test rack where we test all of our multiple devices of our hardware, and then we provide it to our customers. Our customers can then add their application, do a little bit additional testing, and then deploy it to the device out in the field. And as continuously the mainline provides LTS updates with fixing vulnerabilities or bugs within the LTS release, we can create nightly builds out of that and test it in the same way we've tested the first version. And you can rely on a pre-tested nightly build that you can just take and use for your updates, adding your application again, doing little tests, and then deploying it again. We can also offer this especially for customer-specific hardware. So if you've created a carrier board that differs from our typical single board computers and you are using our system on module, we can take your hardware, integrate it into this test system, add additional tests. If you're saying your application needs certain functionalities or certain libraries, we can test them and then provide them to you. You can add your application and deploy also in a timely manner. This is really nice when considering that CRA, the EU regulations are now coming up and becoming active. And since we have a standardized mechanism, this is standardized for all system on modules that fulfill FPSC as a hardware standard. And this completes the Finox security offerings where we have the capability to support you, of course. We have our secure distribution, as I explained, that is already prepared and standardized. We have the update and device management system based on Rauk or others. I mean, we can also support any vendor that is out there. For example, QB is one of our partners that we like to work with. They have a very sophisticated hosted update mechanism. And we have device initialization where we have a secure area in our production. We can then add the secure mechanisms, activate them on the system on module or on the carrier board, encrypt memory, and inject keys that are required or certificates. And we can provide common vulnerability checking by providing reports of any vulnerabilities that your product might have for a certain release. And when we do software lifecycle management, where we provide those nightly builds pre-tested to you, we also provide a CVE report to go with it to show you exactly how your product might be affected by vulnerabilities. Yeah, and that pretty much wraps it up. So you can see we have future-proof solder core technology as something that covers a lot of requirements that are typical, and we thought about a lot of things, putting in our experience from over 35 years in making modules, SOMs, and 15 years of doing system on modules that are soldered. Yeah, so I think it's a good standard, and we also thought about the software part, which is most of the time forgotten. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you had fun and it was informative for you. And yeah, I hope we will see each other again for another webinar with Phytec, or I will see you in a one-to-one discussion about our products and maybe even together with our sales team. So if you have interest in any of our products, or if you have more questions about FPSC that come up later, don't hesitate to contact me. We will send my contact information, right? And yeah, just write me an email and I'll get back to you and we can have discussions as much as you want.